Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at our inaugural Agents Connect. My name is William Petty. I'm Managing Director at Bonas MacFarlane. This session is looking at the UK landscape for non-British families, visas, investments, and key considerations. I'm delighted to be joined by my long-term associate and extremely professional lawyer Kelvin Tanner from Charles Russell Speechlys, who's a partner and indeed heads up the immigration department. He's going to be walking you through the current climate. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Will, and thanks everybody for joining the session. Of the session is that I wanted to give everyone an overview and a kind of understanding of UK immigration, options for students to come and study here, options for parents and families who might want to come and live in the UK while their children are studying. And the idea here being to mean that you're well informed on everything that you need to talk to prospective students and families about kind of when it comes to moving to the UK. In terms of the slides, I think you can now see the slides. I'm going to very quickly skip through the slide on the firm, just to say that we're an international full-service firm. As Will mentioned, I'm a partner and head of the immigration team, and kind of within the team, among various things that we work on, we do a lot of work assisting people moving to the UK. Largely when that's driven by people choosing to send their children to the UK. So I have a lot of experience understanding the kind of options available and how best to plan for those moves. In terms of the options for students, so we have in the UK some well-established immigration routes for students, both for people coming to study at school age and people coming to study beyond school age for university. So the first category of visa for students is the child student visa. This is a category for children aged between 4 and 17. And to be able to be sponsored on a student visa, the key thing is you need to have a sponsor. And that means that the school that the child is coming to study at has to be a licensed sponsor, and they have to be willing to issue sponsorship to the student. I say that because not every independent school in the UK does sponsor student visas, and it's always important to ensure that they will be able to assist where somebody is going to need a visa. Where they can't assist with a student visa, we would need to otherwise find a way for that child to be permitted to come and live in the UK, and that's something that we'll cover later on. Whenever we're sponsoring a student visa, there's always a financial requirement to be met. Generally, that means that the person needs to be able to show that they have enough money to cover the course fees and living costs. That would normally be kind of, for example, the first year of course fees plus living costs, and the Home Office have various formulas to specify how much money somebody needs to have available. One thing that's important is that they need to have consent from both parents, unless only one parent has sole responsibility. And following some recent kind of reviews and amendments that have been made to basically ensure sort of safeguarding for children, there is a kind of more enhanced care and accommodation requirement in the UK, effectively to be able to show that when the child isn't in school, for example, if they're boarding, that there is a suitable arrangement in place. So where somebody's coming to board in the UK, we would still need to be able to show that outside of kind of boarding time, so effectively kind of weekends or holidays, either they have a nominated guardian, a private foster care, a close relative, who would be able to care for them. So that's something that I think it's important to be aware of, because some of these changes were introduced effective from May of this year, and so will be relevant to people coming to study in the UK now. The next slide covers the same student visa category, but effectively for adult students or older students aged from 16 and above. And again, the key thing is, in order to be sponsored, you have to be going to study at a college or a university that has a sponsor license. For this category, you need to be studying at A level or above. So that's, I guess, A level, sort of IB level, or kind of university level. You would need to meet an English language requirement for this route. Usually it's level B1 or 2, unless you meet that automatically because you're from, for example, a majority English-speaking country. There's again a financial requirement. And in this route, there's slightly more focus on showing that you are a genuine student, and within that, an obligation to make academic progress. So you can't kind of, they prevent you from continuing to kind of reapply to sort of study at the same level. And they do that in part by having a cap on the total time that you can spend studying in the UK. So you can spend up to 2 years on a student visa below degree level, usually only up to 5 years at degree level, unless you're studying certain types of courses, like medicine, that have much longer study times. An important thing to note is that this route no longer allows dependents to accompany the student, unless they're on certain research-based masters and PhDs. And that's, again, a more recent change that it's important to be aware of. Another thing that may come up or have questions about this is, when somebody's coming to the UK on a student visa, they do have some limited work permission. In most cases, it's always important to check the person's immigration conditions and their visa to verify this, but usually a student can work part-time during term time, and then they would be able to work full-time during their vacation, or when they complete a course, if they still have time left on their visa. We've then included some information on dependent children. So the first two slides that I covered basically are for people who are studying in the UK on child student or student visas. and being sponsored specifically to come and study. But the other way in which you would be able to come to the UK and study is if you otherwise qualify for a visa. So, if somebody is coming to work in the UK and they have a work visa, then their partner and children can qualify for dependent visas. And a dependent child of a kind of qualifying other visa category is able to study in the UK. This is, I think, very relevant where you're speaking to families and it's clear that the parents will also want to move to the UK. It's also really important if you're speaking to families who want their children to go to, for example, a prep school that does not sponsor student visas, because this may be the only way in which they would be able to have permission to be in the UK and to study in the UK and so to attend that school. In terms of kind of where parents want to study in the UK, want to accompany their child when they're studying in the UK, there are kind of a couple of ways it can be done, perhaps more straightforwardly. So an important way that can be done is there is a visa called the Parent of a Child Student Visa. That can be used to basically allow up to one parent, but not both parents, to come and live in the UK with their child while they're studying, provided the child is under the age of 12. So effectively for children coming to study between the ages of 4 and 11, who are sponsored on a child student visa by an independent school that has a sponsor license, a parent can accompany. They're not permitted to work in the UK, and this route isn't a route that would lead to eventually being given, say, permanent residence in the UK. So this provides what I would describe as a temporary solution where both parents don't plan to move to the UK and where there's no need for the parent who's coming to the UK to have a right to work. But it doesn't provide a long-term solution, because if the parents plan for their children to continue studying beyond the age of 11, they need to have a plan as to what they're going to do. That might mean sending the children to boarding school and then moving on to the next part of this slide, which is just spending time visiting them in the UK. But if parents don't want their children to go to boarding school, we'd need to find an immigration route that would allow the family to move, and I'll cover that in a moment. So in terms of visiting the UK, I think this is really important to cover, because in many cases, particularly where children are boarding, parents won't necessarily need to live in the UK. They might be happy to know that they have either a kind of a visit visa or they're entitled to enter as a visitor, and can simply visit the UK for their children's holidays, potentially at some weekends. The UK permits a visitor to enter for up to 6 months in some cases without them being deemed to have overstayed. The key thing is that visitors have to be entering for a permitted reason. So, for example, as a tourist or for certain business activities, but they don't have permission to work. And if you are spending either more than 180 days or 6 months in the UK and overstaying, or if you are spending lots of time in the UK, making very frequent successive visits to the UK, you can face difficulties because they may say that you're trying to make the UK your home. But in many cases, if you don't need to be here the whole time, you are happy to come and go, visit during term times, the visit option is a good one. And a point to flag there is the UK have recently introduced what's called electronic travel authorization, which is very similar to people that may have traveled to the US with an ESTA, but effectively you have to apply for electronic travel authorization before traveling to the UK, where you're somebody who is a non-visa national. So you don't normally need to have a visit visa to travel. So I'm just trying to skip over to the next one. So this is now kind of looking at what options are available where parents want to move to the UK while their child is studying. And there are kind of a few different options. So that I think the key message here is where you're having conversations with parents, it's clear that they're looking at the UK and plan to move with their children. It's really important to flag, look, there's not an automatic visa route that says both parents can go and live in the UK because your child is studying. Instead, we need to work out how they can move to the UK and what type of visa might be suitable for them. And this can take some time, and as will become clear, some of these routes, require quite detailed documentation to be prepared, or maybe some preliminary steps, such as kind of establishing companies before a visa can be issued. So the first box here is the skilled worker visa. So this is the main work visa for the UK. It's something that's used by kind of all companies and employers in the UK. They have to, very similar to a student visa, they have to have a license that allows them to sponsor the work visa. They have to be a genuine organization that's operating lawfully in the UK, and they have to be sponsoring somebody who is filling a genuine role. But often clients may have existing business interests in the UK. They may have an overseas company and they may want to expand that business into the UK. Or maybe they're working for an international company and that company can kind of employ them in the UK. These are all things that would give them options and allow them to come and be based in the UK on a work visa, and in turn allow them to sponsor their partner and children to come and be based in the UK and attend school. So that provides quite a good solution that covers the entire family. A work visa under the skilled worker route can be given for 5 years, and you can get permanent residence after 5 years under the current rules. So something that we see a lot of, but it does take some planning, particularly, for example, if the company has not yet established in the UK, or it might be that there is an existing company in the UK that wants to sponsor, but they don't have a license to allow them to sponsor, and they need to make that application beforehand. So something to take early advice on. The next option is the global business mobility route. So this has two strands. One is the senior and specialist worker route, which is effectively kind of intra-company transfers where people are being sent on assignments from an overseas company to a UK branch or subsidiary or connected entity. The other, which is quite interesting, often for families, is the UK expansion worker. So where there is an overseas headquartered company that doesn't have an existing trading presence in the UK. So they what that means is they don't have an existing UK company and they're not employing anybody in the UK. That company can send or apply for a license that will allow them to send up to 5 people to the UK to establish their operations, and effectively to incorporate either a wholly owned subsidiary or to register a branch of their overseas company. What this means is kind of where you have clients that have very successful or even kind of moderately successful companies outside the UK that don't exist in the UK, there's effectively a ready-made visa route that if they want to expand operations, they can move to the UK under this route. They can bring their family, as with the previous category. And the idea here is you would then transition into the main skilled worker route on the left-hand side as soon as the company is up and running and able to get the skilled worker license. The innovator founder route is a more niche route, but really useful for the right applicant. So this is for effectively entrepreneurial people, ideally that may have had a background, in establishing businesses previously, who can show that they have been endorsed by one of 4 approved endorsing bodies for having an innovative, viable, and scalable business idea. So it's not for anyone. It's for people that can really show that they've got kind of potentially a high potential, high growth company that they want to establish. The great thing about this route is you can then come to the UK to establish that company, and if the company does well, we'll get permanent residence potentially after only 3 years. The global talent visa is another one that it's important to be aware of, and hopefully you'll once you know your clients, you'll get a sense of whether they might be potential applicants. So this is for it's for existing established leaders in their particular specialist fields or potential future leaders. And it covers fields like academia and research, arts and culture, and digital technology. The benefit of this route is it allows, again, everybody to move to the UK and the global talent visa holder effectively to be permitted to do very, very much what they want in the UK, as long as they are kind of active in their specialist field. So these are, I think, a flavour of some of the options that normally we would be talking to our clients about to help identify the best way to move to the UK. What you'll see isn't on this slide, and it's not on this slide because we don't have that route, is a golden visa. So we no longer have a sort of just a straightforward investor visa where you can move to the UK by way of having made a passive investment into sort of UK companies or into property. So that route, unfortunately, at the moment, is not an immigration route that we can use in the UK. Very briefly, because I expect this is something that may come up in conversations that you have when parents are sort of thinking about their child's future beyond studies, is to say, well, what can my child do if they want to stay and continue to live in the UK? So we have some post-study options. So the first and the main one is that the UK have a graduate visa. So anybody who has been on a student visa and has graduated from a UK university is able to apply for a 2-year graduate visa, which is like a post-study work visa. It allows that person to remain living in the UK and gives them a right to work. The idea is that they will get some experience, and hopefully if they want to remain living in the UK, they will be able to then transition into a different visa category. For example, the skilled worker route for somebody who is now working for a UK company, perhaps the innovator founder route if somebody has decided they want to set up their own company. The graduate visa and student visas, they don't lead to permanent residence. That would only be possible under one of the other kind of qualifying routes. There is a 10-year long residence application that some people may ask about. So that's if you have lived in the UK on a qualifying visa for 10 years continuously. And finally, I just thought it'd be helpful to touch on some of the other things that may come up. Now, my area, as you'll have gathered, is immigration. But as a firm, we work with a lot of families, and they often also need assistance from my colleagues on their pre-arrival tax planning when they want to buy property in the UK. So there are kind of things to be aware of. I think the key thing is tax. So if your parents or the parents of the student are spending a lot of time in the UK, it's important that they know that there is always a risk that they could become tax resident, and to effectively make sure that they don't accidentally become tax resident. So, for example, if you're spending more than 183 days in the UK each year, there's a very good chance that you are tax resident. But there are ways in which you can become tax resident by having spent less time than that, even if you have lots of ties to the UK, because you have a home here, you have family here, you're working, things like that. So this is something that can take people by surprise. And it's really important to understand how the UK tax rules will apply. And if you are looking to move to the UK as a family under one of the routes that I mentioned, it's a near certainty, if you're spending time in the UK, that you would become tax resident, and at the very least need to be planning for that possibility. The UK have an interesting 4-year and a very new route called the 4-year foreign income and gain regime. And what can be very beneficial for kind of incoming families under this route is you would be exempt from most foreign income and gain, or your foreign income and gains would be exempt from UK tax for usually that 4-year period, which the very least kind of gives people, a nice break and an ability to plan for then when they do eventually become tax resident. The other thing is property. So when people are moving to the UK as a family, often kind of one of the things they want to do either before they move or kind of once they're here and have decided, where they feel comfortable living, is to purchase property. So the UK have no restriction on the ability to buy a property. And the other thing to flag is there are some restrictions on renting property. So there are right to rent checks that landlords need to undertake to effectively verify immigration status before they can rent a property to a tenant. And that can sometimes cause some confusion and be something that comes up, for example, where somebody plans to spend lots of time visiting their child in the UK and also wants to rent a property. So again, these are sometimes scenarios where people need some advice. This was obviously quite a fast-paced run through student immigration, options for families, everything that I think might be relevant. It's by no means intended to be everything because we didn't have very much time available. But I am very happy, to take some questions now. But also, given the limited time available, my details are included on the following slide. So I'm always happy to be contacted directly as well.
Kelvin,
did you want to query anything or?
Thank you very much. I'm just checking with our team that I'm being heard by the whole audience. I hope I am. Kelvin, that's just brilliant, and just quite an extraordinary sort of run through of what's a much more complicated landscape. You and I have had the pleasure of working alongside each other for many years now, and as you pointed out, the golden route and the golden days of that route is over. But in its wake have come these rather sophisticated but also quite malleable alternatives. Am I right in saying that the FIG is sort of the kind of surrogate bastard child of the non-dom?
Effectively, yeah, exactly. So the non-dom is no more. Like the sort of concepts of domicile in tax, I think, is no more. And it is the government's kind of attempt to try to sort of still make the UK attractive to high net worth individuals that might look to move to the UK. The challenge, coming back to the previous point, is there is no investor visa or obvious means by which people would move to the UK. So you kind of have this challenge where we have people that do want to move to the UK to take advantage of the new 4-year program. But you have to squeeze yourself into a work visa or some other route. And for high net worths, ultra high net worths, they may not want to kind of have that conventional salaried employment setup. So it's a challenge. I think that we have to watch this space as to whether the government try to do more. I don't think we're entirely ruling out them introducing something that might replace the investor visa in some form or another. But I also
transitional route, really, that right?
Possible, but I think that it would be more focused on kind of investing, for example, in high growth, high potential companies or certain priority sectors for the government. Like AI and biotech and things would be my guess. But at the same time, it's such a kind of slightly fraught and complicated political climate at the moment that it's hard to predict.
Yeah, of course. And amongst that sort of that fraught nature and the sort of peculiar atmosphere that we're in at the moment, are the British government kind of doing something to advertise, popularize the existence of these newer routes, or is it really at the behest of people who are keen to sort of go and fish out the information for themselves?
I think unfortunately, I would say that it's kind of for people to fish out information and get good advice. What I would say is that the UK, as all countries do, say we want to attract the brightest and best and the most talented, and we want more people to qualify for global talent visas and innovator founder visas, which are categories that are kind of set up for either the leaders in their field or people that have got really great high potential, high growth companies. But you need to do more to attract those people than just call a visa category innovator founder. You need to create the climate within the UK for those companies to be attracted, and that includes lots of things like tax, like the ability to bring the skilled workers in, to work for the company once it's established. And I think the other thing that people need to be aware of is we have almost sometimes a disconnect between, for example, what the Treasury want in terms of attracting wealth into the country and what the Home Office want in reducing immigration. And they don't always line up well together. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is a challenge where the Home Office are taking a slightly more robust approach to looking at immigration applications, and that can make it more difficult for people. So if you try to navigate these routes without good advice, increasingly we see people kind of failing to be issued their visas. And I think planning ahead is important, and I think getting good advice is important.
Of course, as always. We've got quite an interesting question in the Q&A, Kelvin, and I think we're going to have to leave it there for the next session. But George asked us, can dependent children of parents who are here on a work visa access government-funded schools? I assume he means maintained schools, or only fee-paying schools?
So the answer is, if you are on a child student visa, which is not the question, then you absolutely has to be an independent school. If you are on a dependent visa, so a dependent of a skilled worker, dependent of a global talent visa, for example, then you can attend school in the UK, and that would include a non-fee paying school, so a state school, government funded school. So you have very much the choice. Yeah.
Brilliant, Kelvin. Look, thank you so much, and to our audience, we, with Kelvin's permission, we'll circulate those slides to you, because they were packed full of absolutely brilliant information. And just for the record, obviously, were I to need one, I would obviously get the global talent visa, because that sounds incredibly impressive, and I would be applicable for that. Kelvin, as ever, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating, brilliant, and hugely insightful. And thank you to our audience, and apologies for the Hackney soundtrack in the background from me.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.